Welcome. Thank you for joining us for the SRCD Policy Fellowship panel, exploring the federal and state fellowship experience. I'm Kelly Fisher, SRCD's Director for Policy, and I'm joined by Rosabolito, SRCD's Policy Assistant. We are also joined by our current federal and state policy fellows. Let's go ahead and get started. So, through immersive learning experiences, the SRCD Policy Fellowship Program aims to provide our fellows with firsthand experience in federal or state policymaking, program implementation, and evaluation. Also providing Congress, federal and state executive branch agencies greater access to research expertise on a diverse range of child development topics to enhance evidence-based policy development, implementation, and evaluation. It also provides opportunities to build a larger network of experts that can bridge developmental science, federal and state policymaking, and practice. Now let's go in and explore a little bit more in detail the structure of each fellowship program. Let's first start with the state policy fellowship structure. For pre-doctoral fellows, our fellows are placed in state agencies that focus on state pre-kindergarten programs. These are part-time fellowships that last for about 20 hours per week. That's on average. Sometimes it's a little bit more, sometimes it's a little bit less, depending on your own school programming, for example. You also receive a stipend in tuition and health insurance allowance, and you're also supported by a state supervisor and SRCD supervisor, as well as an academic mentor. Similarly, for postdocs, placements must be in state agencies that focus on early childhood, with a stronger preference for early learning and care experiences. And that preference is focused based on our particular funders at any given time for the fellowship. So please make sure that you pay attention to the website when you look through our informational resources on the website to see if there is an indicator or a focus or a preference for particular kinds of placements. For our postdocs, it is a full-time experience, 40 hours a week. You also receive a stipend and health insurance allowance. It is a full-time stipend, which is commensurate with your experience coming out of graduate school. It's based on the federal GS scale, starting at the GS scale level 12, step 1, based on your locality. For more information, please also see our website. Similarly with the pre-doc, the postdocs are supported by a state supervisor, an SRCD supervisor, as well as an academic mentor. So in addition to the immersive learning experience of the fellowship experience, you also receive a lot more professional development training through SRCD. We provide a 2-day training focused on child and family federal policy, typically in the DC area, unless we are still in the midst of a pandemic, and then it will be online. We have also a 1-day state-specific training on the state's child and family policy landscape. In this context, when you are a fellow in a specific state, we organize a state-based training program for you for 1 day, and one of our supervisors, SRCD supervisors, flies out to meet with you as a state fellow and goes through that fellowship training experience with you. We also have monthly family policy and career development trainings throughout the year. All fellows develop an individualized professional development plan, and they also have some sort of funding for professional development in and of itself. So for pre-docs, they receive funding to attend an early childhood focused conference. For postdocs, they receive $2,800 in professional development funds. At the end of the year, they typically fly to SRCD's office within Washington, D.C. for a Capstone Meeting, in which all of our fellows share their experiences, what they've learned, and what their product portfolios are that they've developed over the course of the year through their fellowship. As you can see from this map, we have fellows spanning across the United States from the East Coast to the West Coast, and we hope that this map will fill in over time. So our fellows have engaged in a wide variety of meaningful activities at their placements, and we cannot possibly share all of them, of course, but we want to give you a sample of what those may look like. Many of our fellows have developed state needs assessments and assessment tools. They've worked with others to develop strategic plans and state improvement plans. They've created data systems to improve agencies' use of data-informed decision-making. They've conducted quantitative and qualitative data analysis for legislative reports, policy-making decisions, and program improvements. They've also co-wrote federal grants to support the state's early education programs and services. They've also led focus groups and community meetings with early childhood stakeholders. For more examples, please visit our website. If you're interested in applying, and we really hope you are, I'd like to go over really quickly the applicant requirements. There's definitely more information on our website, so please be sure to check that out if you're interested in the fellowship programs for the state. So for pre-docs, you need to be a member of SRCD as well as a US citizen. You must be enrolled in a doctoral level program relevant to child development. You must have completed 2 years of coursework by the start of the fellowship year, and you must be in good academic standing. Similarly, for postdocs, you need to be a member of SRCD and a US citizen. You must have a doctoral level degree relevant to child development. You must have received your doctoral degree within 2 years or less prior to the start of the fellowship experience. Now, let's quickly go over the federal fellowship experience. We actually have 2 types of fellowships. The first is a congressional and the second is an executive branch fellowship. For the congressional fellowship, you may be placed in an individual senator or representative's office or in a committee office, such as the House Committee on Education and Labor. You also have a variety of experiences in either of these sorts of placements. You could work on drafting and negotiating legislation, staffing congressional meetings, using research to inform the reauthorization of programs or appropriations, advising members of Congress of specific research and data and how it can potentially inform policies, federal programs, and services affecting children, youth, and families. And also you may find yourself speaking with constituents from the home state. So for the executive branch fellowship, you can be placed in several different kinds of offices. The first type of office is a research and evaluation office. So examples of this would be the Office of Planning, Research and Evaluation, or the Office of Assistant Secretary for Planning and Evaluation, ASPE. Again, there's a variety of types of experiences and responsibilities that you may engage in these types of offices. This includes conducting evaluations of federal programs. So for example, the Head Start Impact Study, a Responsible Fatherhood Program Impact Study at OPRE. We've seen our fellows do a few of those. You could be working on developing new research agendas to inform programs and policies that serve diverse populations. So this could include, in OPRE, for example, you could work with your Head Start partners and an OPRE team to identify research needs to address specific questions where there are gaps in the literature, including programs that serve specific populations, such as migrant, Hispanic, Latinx, and Native American children. You may also oversee summaries of the state of the evidence. You could serve on interagency work groups or on particular projects or topics. You could also write a request for proposals for grant programs. So the next kind of placement that you could have in the executive branch fellowship would be program offices. These include program offices like Office of Head Start or Office of Child Care. In these types of offices, you could support work on reviewing state, territory, and tribal plans for childcare and early education program implementation in those respective areas, manage federally funded grant programs to organizations who provide education or childcare services. You could conduct reviews of the national early education and care landscape. You could also support and guide program monitoring activities and technical assistance providers. And lastly, you could develop and amend program rules and regulations. So in one type of office, you could be facilitating research to support that kind of programming, versus in the program offices, you would be responsible for supporting the program implementation and improvement efforts. In addition to these immersive learning experiences, also you would receive several SRCD professional development supports. This includes 2-day training focused on child and family federal policy at the beginning of the year, attending monthly child and family policy and career development trainings throughout the fellowship year. Our fellows also develop individualized education, professional development plans, and they receive a $2,800 allowance for professional development activities. And the federal fellows, just like the state fellows, attend a capstone at the end of the year where they share their experiences and their portfolio work. In addition to SRCD supports, our federal fellows also get supports from the American Association for the Advancement of Science. We partner with them on an annual basis to produce these fellowships and year-long immersive learning experiences. AAAS actually provides a 2-week science policy orientation at the beginning of the year, and they also provide career development programming and social events throughout the fellowship year, not just with, of course, our SRCD fellows, but all of the AAAS fellows. And over the last year, I believe that was around 350 scientists who have come to work in congressional and executive branch agencies. So you would actually be able to interact with them, learn from them, and get to know them as well. If you're interested in applying for the federal fellowship program, you need to have a doctoral level degree relevant to child development. You need to be a member of SRCD and a US citizen. You must demonstrate exceptional competence in an area of child development research. You can be an early, mid-career, or advanced career scholar. And you must be able to commit to 12 full months for a full-time placement in Washington, DC. For more information, of course, visit our website. So through 2021, there have been 187 SRCD Federal Policy Fellows and 18 SRCD State Policy Fellows. Our fellowship alumni continue to contribute greatly to the work of bridging child development research and policy through a variety of career paths. In fact, over 60% of our fellows go on to more applied careers working at in the federal or state government, working in think tanks, consulting firms, philanthropic foundations, and more. They also contribute greatly to SRCD, whether that is conducting research, serving as reviewers of SRCD research articles that are in press or going to go in press. They also serve on a variety of committees, caucuses, and even we've had some in governing council. There are a variety of resources that we also provide for alumni. There's a fellowship listserv, Facebook and LinkedIn groups, as well as we send out weekly messages to our alumni detailing current policy updates, as well as jobs and much, much more. So now I'm going to turn it over to Rose.
Hello, everyone. My name is Rosabolito, and I am the policy assistant here at SRCD. I use she, her pronouns. And thank you, Kelly, for giving us that overview of SRCD's fellowship programs. We are now going to transition to the panel with our current fellows. So we are happy to introduce our current fellows. So Elena, would you like to go first?
Thank you so much, Rose. My name is Elena Schreier. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm a second-year fellow in the Office of the Assistant Secretary for Planning and Evaluation at HHS, or ASPE.
And I'm Christian Klesse. My pronouns are he, him, and I am a congressional fellow on Senator Bob Casey's staff working on his disability policy team within his Special Committee on Aging.
Hi, I'm Andrew McGee, also go by Drew. I use he, him pronouns, and I'm one of the State Policy Fellows, and my placement is with the Office for Early Childhood in Denver, Colorado, in the Colorado Department of Human Services.
Hello, my name is Jen Finders, and I use she, her pronouns. I am a state policy postdoctoral fellow in Indiana at the Office of Early Childhood and Out of School Learning, which is within the Family and Social Services Administration.
Hello, everyone. My name is Lorena Sebes. My pronouns are she, her. I am an executive branch fellow at the Office of Head Start in the Administration for Children and Families.
Hello, everyone. My name is Frances Martinez Pedraza. I'm an executive branch policy fellow in my first year at the Office of Child Care in the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services.
Hi, everyone. I'm Wendy Way. I go by she, her, and I'm a state policy predoctoral fellow at the Massachusetts Department of Early Education and Care.
Hi everyone, I'm Parisa. I'm an SRCD Executive Branch Fellow, and I'm carrying out my fellowship at the Eunice Kennedy Shriver National Institute of Child Health and Human Development in the Child Development and Behavior Branch. And I use she, her pronouns.
Hi everyone, my name is Ellen Lekowski. My pronouns are she, her, and I am a second-year Executive Branch Fellow in the Office of Planning, Research, and Evaluation.
Hi, my name is Diana Tran, and I'm also an Executive Branch Fellow in my first year at the Office of Planning, Research, and Evaluation.
Hello, everyone. My name is Crystal Chaudala. I'm also an Executive Branch Fellow in the Office of Planning, Research, and Evaluation, and my pronouns are she, her.
Hello, my name is Jackie Gross. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm also an Executive Branch Fellow in the Office of Planning, Research, and Evaluation.
Thank you everyone for introducing yourself and providing a little background. And now we're excited to hear more about your fellowship experiences. So this first set of questions we're going to be exploring before the fellowship. So how the fellows kind of decided and prepared for this fellowship. So to start off, I'm going to ask Elena, why were you interested in pursuing an executive branch fellowship?
Thanks so much, Rose, for that great question. I'm a clinical psychologist, and the majority of my clinical and research work throughout my doctoral and postdoctoral training was in applied community-based settings. So places like Head Start, child advocacy centers, community mental health clinics, and systems of care. And I really saw firsthand how policy decisions impacted programs and families at a local level. So things like how federal budget cuts meant a reduction in number of child care or Head Start slots for families, and how changes to Head Start federal policy on renewing the grants impacted how local programs focused on and measured quality. And I also saw how families with young kids were often involved in multiple services across multiple systems, and they frequently faced barriers to service access because of how the systems were fragmented. And I found that as a clinician, I was addressing those barriers to service access at an individual level, when really they're systems issues. And that really led me to want to better understand the policymaking process through direct policy experience, and to play a role in improving the systems themselves. So I really pursued the fellowship to better understand how developmental science contributed to the programmatic and policy decisions guiding programs serving families with young kids, and to learn how to more effectively translate the research on effective systems and services for families to a policymaking audience. So I wanted to apply my own experience and expertise to that process in order to improve early childhood programs and the system itself.
Great, thank you so much for sharing that, Elena. Christian, how about you? Why were you interested in pursuing the Congressional Fellowship?
Thanks, Rose. Similar to Elena, I, in graduate school, was pursuing more of an applied developmental track. And so it was a lot of my experiences working with families and working with statewide agencies that on a daily basis, whether it was working with a regional autism network that served as a resource and referral hub, or doing developmental assessments and autism diagnostic assessments, I was routinely hearing from families that there were these systemic barriers in place to receiving the services that they really needed. And even if we were able to point them in the direction of services, things would always come up that they couldn't access services, or they had different issues with insurance or providers or things like that. And just hearing those over and over again really pushed me to pursue a career in policy, hoping to ultimately affect change in that realm. And so particularly the Congressional Fellowship, I thought was a good fit for me because it would give me that firsthand experience working on the Hill, working with policymakers, learning how to use research, use developmental research, and take stakeholder feedback. So people who are experiencing conditions themselves or their family members who support them, and take their feedback and use that to create a bill or strengthen an existing bill. And also to learn the process of, writing a bill from the very beginning to soliciting feedback, editing bills, working with our colleagues on the Hill on both sides of the aisle to try and gain support for legislation, and really getting to know the nuts and bolts of how that works. And also the fellowship provides a good opportunity to kind of build professional networks. As Kelly mentioned, there's a lot of alumni on the Hill that I can tap into for advice and help. And then also just the professional training that the fellowship provides, really, I think, is providing me with a good step for the end of the year to pursue this policy career.
Great. Thank you so much to both Christian and Elena for sharing a little bit about your decision process for the federal fellowship. So now, Drew, could you tell us a little bit about identifying a state placement for your fellowship?
Yeah, thank you, Rose. So for my personal placement with Kendra Dunn in the Office of Early Childhood, there were sort of two separate paths that both led to the placement. Within my research lab, we have a more advanced student who previously did a different policy fellowship placement also in the Office of Early Childhood. And she connected Kendra and I to discuss beforehand what projects there might be and what opportunities there might be for me to take part in a policy fellowship and get that really applied experience. Along with that, Kendra and my academic mentor, Sarah Wadamura, had a previous working relationship based in intervention work. So that connection definitely helped with the familiarity and initial discussions about our overlap and about the fellowship in general. So for me, I would say if you are looking for a placement, it's worth it to think about your current mentor relationships, as well as consulting with other people in your research lab or your program overall, and to think about what connections or relationships might already exist that you can build from or get advice from. And somewhere in there may be a relationship or partnership available that would really be a good fit for you and your interests related to policy and this fellowship.
Great. Thank you so much for sharing that, Drew. That's really helpful. Jen, would you like to talk a little bit about your experience in identifying a placement?
Yes, thanks, Rose. Similar to Drew, I did have some research experience with my placement office prior to the fellowship that really increased my interest in state policy. So at the time that I applied, I was a postdoctoral research fellow at Purdue University, and I was working on the evaluation of state-funded pre-K here in Indiana. My position was actually funded at the time by the office that I currently work at as a policy fellow. So I had some interaction with the state agency through the evaluation project at Purdue, but being more on the research side, my knowledge about state policy was very superficial, and I really wanted to gain a much deeper understanding about decision-making on the policy side. So it was through my involvement with state-funded pre-K that I became interested in learning more about the broader child care landscape, and in particular with regards to administering CCDF and various quality initiatives. And the SRCD State Policy Fellowship was the perfect mechanism for me to pursue these interests. I was also fortunate in that my experience with the evaluation of state-funded pre-K provided me with enough information to think about how I might become integrated into the office and communicate the ways in which my skills as a researcher could be used to help advance current priorities. So in my situation, the specific placement was ultimately what drove my decision to apply for this fellowship opportunity. It wasn't just an afterthought.
Awesome. Thank you so much for sharing, Jen. So the next set of questions, we are going to be exploring the focus of the fellowship placements. First, we're going to have Lorena. So Lorena, could you tell me what is one of the most exciting or meaningful projects that you have worked on at your placement so far? And also, did you have any aha moments during one of these projects?
Thank you, Rose, for that question. So it's actually very exciting because I'm placed in the Office of Head Start, which is a program office. And Head Start is one of those unique programs that is federally funded where the money goes straight from federal to local. So that's a pretty exciting mechanism. And at the Office of Head Start, I'm placed specifically right now working a lot of projects within the policy division. So I've been doing a lot of deep work within regulations and really get to know some of the rules and stuff that have to be implemented by the program. And within that, so the Office of Head Start, the Head Start Act has actually not been reauthorized in over 10 years. So a lot of projects I'm working on are specifically to inform efforts towards reauthorization. One of those projects specifically is focused on staff recruitment and retention. So as a lot of you all know, if you have an interest in early childhood, a big issue we face is low wages in the early childhood workforce. So we're coming up with different mechanisms that we can inform Congress on some of the issues related to this problem of wages. And some of these efforts that relate to this include, I'm writing a data brief with another SRCD fellow in another office, which is exciting to see how research is directly impacting some of these policy efforts. We're also creating a data brief using our internal program data to show how some of these wages are not even keeping up with inflation. And then lastly, we're kind of bringing this all together and creating a policy memo that where we're proposing some ways that we think this should be addressed. So when reauthorization comes along, we're ready and we have the information prepared and that we've done our research, have checked our own data, and have done all the background knowledge we need to make an informed decision and inform Congress of like, this is what we propose is the best mechanism to address wages. And related to the aha moment, so I myself wasn't necessarily focused on staff issues in the early childhood area, not even actually was an adolescent researcher in grad school, but having the aha moment made me realize that our skills, our PhD level researchers go beyond our content area. We have so much to offer. And I've been able to see that in the different efforts within this project. Like with the research area, I've been able to bring an equity lens, which was a main focus of my area of grad school, even though it's not particularly the same area of research. And I've also been able to see how some of the experiences in grad school that I thought didn't really matter actually are making a bigger impact than I thought in my placement. So I think it's important to think about your experiences as a graduate student, if you're thinking about pursuing the fellowship, of how those will actually implement and take you further in your fellowship than you can imagine.
Wow, that sounds really interesting. Thank you so much for sharing, Lorena. Next, Francis, could you speak to what you've been learning about the linkages between research and policy, and also any connections you've seen between congressional, state, and federal executive branch policy?
Absolutely. Thank you, Rose. So as a researcher myself, it has been very humbling to be at the other side of the policy making process and sort of like witness how research is integrated into policy, particularly within a program office like the Office of Child Care. So one of the things I've learned is that policymakers are actually really open and interested in being informed by research. However, I think one of the biggest challenges that they face is that it can sometimes be hard to incorporate research findings into policy for multiple reasons. One of them being one that we let any researcher probably knows, which is that research has a lot of limitations, oftentimes in terms of generalization. And policymakers are often faced with the challenge of having to make decisions that apply to a lot of different people in very diverse contexts, particularly at the federal level, right, where we're talking about making policy that is going to impact people in different states, in different U.S. territories, and different tribal governments as well. And I think the second challenge is that sometimes research is slower, right? And that policymakers are frequently having to make decisions quickly, like in the current pandemic, right? We've seen many of our policymakers having to make decisions to sort of respond to the different realities, but the research is not necessarily at the same, progressing at the same speed as our situations are progressing. So I would say, though, that one of the things I've learned is that there are significant efforts in place to inform the policy making process with research. So an example of that, I think some of my colleagues at the Office of Planning, Research, and Evaluation could speak better to that, but there are some efforts through some of the offices, other offices in government that sort of like are trying to really address what are the priorities research-wise that different programs have. So for the Office of Child Care, for example, we look to our colleagues at the Office of Planning, Research, and Evaluation to sort of like really inform our work frequently, as well as many different projects that are about looking at the literature and seeing what we can learn and what can we apply from that. The second piece of the question really quickly is that there's many really connections that I've seen in terms of the relationship between Congress and state and the federal executive branch policy. I'm going to use again the Office of Child Care as an example because it's to illustrate some of these connections. So I would say that, for example, Congress has been in charge, and in 2016 they approved the CCDBG Act, which is the law that they reauthorized that law, which is the law that sort of establishes all the regulations for block grants to states, territories, and tribal governments to provide support to children and families, especially children and families from low-income working families, so that they can pay for their childcare and after-school care. So for example, even though Congress is the one in charge of passing those laws, they're often in conversations with offices at the federal level, like the Office of Child Care, which is the one at the federal level that takes the responsibility of administering that kind of program and communicating with states and territories and tribes for the implementation of those programs. At the federal level, they're the ones who approve the plans from the states and territories and tribes. They're also the ones who provide technical assistance. And so states and territories and other jurisdictions are often in very close communication with the Office of Child Care at the federal level as they are, and then the Office of Child Care at the federal level is in close communication sometimes with Congress because they have to report back on how the implementation of all these programs is going nationwide. So those are some of the connections that I've seen, mostly from the federal executive branch side, but I'm sure there's many other connections from the state and congressional side as well.
Thanks so much for your insights, Frances. Next, Wendy, could you also talk a little bit about what you've noticed about research policy linkages and the connections between policy and research at different levels of the government?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Rose. So at the Massachusetts Department of Early Education and Care, or EEC for short, I've seen fairly strong linkages between research and policy. One thing that I've observed is that the research we're trained to do in our doctoral programs is not always the type of research that state agencies are looking for. So we often come in wanting to run causal studies or regression analyses, but at EEC, I actually carry out a lot of descriptive analyses on a day-to-day basis, which the agency has actually found to be invaluable for their work. So for example, I've been involved in analyzing data collected from state-funded pre-K programs targeting low-income communities. Through these analyses, I've addressed some of the following types of questions, like which children and families are being served by this program, what additional sources of funding support pre-K program implementation, and how stable is enrollment across the school year. Although fairly basic from a researcher's perspective, addressing these types of questions provides EEC with a deeper understanding of the who, what, and how. For example, by understanding who is being served by the programs, EEC can know whether the characteristics of those served are aligned with the targeted populations intended by the grant. So these types of questions get at different aspects of the program's goals and can inform changes in how the grant is administered in that specific year as well as following years. So to answer your second question regarding connections between congressional, state, and federal executive branch policy, I just wanted to build a little bit on what Frances was saying regarding funding and the budget. So it was at least surprising to me, but one major connection across these different entities that I've observed is the budget and how the budget from one branch or level really sets a lot of priorities for the state agency, which in my case is Massachusetts. So for example, Head Start and childcare subsidy funding come down from the federal level to the state or to programs directly, and they're earmarked for these specific purposes. And there's not as much leeway once these get applied to a certain place. So similarly at the state level, the governor and state Congress move forward with a budget, and each of the budget lines dictates many of EEC's priorities. So it makes sense that what gets funded gets carried out, but I had never really thought about these aspects as being so interconnected across these different entities.
Great, thank you so much for sharing what you've noticed, Wendy. Next, so Parisa, we each carry our own unique intersecting identities. In what ways have your identities been understood and valued during your experience with the fellowship so far?
Sure. So I'm currently an executive branch fellow at NICHD. But prior to this, I was an SRCD congressional fellow in the office of Senator Chris Coons, and I worked on his health and education policy portfolio. So as you just asked, one aspect of the fellowship experience that I think I've been most grateful for is the opportunity to leverage my different identities. So as a developmental scientist, a policymaker, a science communicator, and an advocate, and apply them through my work at placement positions to better children's lives. I've had the amazing opportunity to draw from my developmental science background as a policymaker to help introduce and move legislation through Congress that supports child development programming. I've worked as an advocate and science communicator alongside national networks of child-facing organizations to distill the outcome of developmental research and disseminate information to the public through op-eds and social media toolkits, and those have helped gain support for bills that impact children's health. And now again, through a program role at NICHD, I'm utilizing my background in developmental science and helping to identify gaps in children's health research and provide recommendations for new funding programs and federal research initiatives that can drive developmental science in a much needed direction. I've truly had the wonderful experience of working collaboratively on interdisciplinary teams with people from diverse sectors, government, academia, nonprofit, community-based organizations, healthcare centers, and the constituents themselves, and learning from them while all together working to advance the shared goal of improving children's lives. So I think I'd say that if you are, as an applicant or someone who really has a desire to leverage sort of these different, multiple identities in the work that you're doing to help improve children's outcomes, I strongly encourage you to consider applying for the SRCD Fellowship Program.
Great, thank you for sharing your insights, Parisa. Ellen, can you speak to how changing priorities have affected the opportunities you've had for work at your fellowship placement?
Sure, thanks, Rose. So during my time as a fellow, there have been two major events that have shaped priorities within my placement office, which is the Office of Planning, Research, and Evaluation. So one of these has been the COVID-19 pandemic, and the other has been the presidential transition. Although the scope and the nature of our work at OPRE has stayed relatively similar, there have been some shifts in the mechanisms through which we distribute our research findings, and also how we really engage with key stakeholders to ensure that our work is as relevant and impactful as possible. So within OPRE, I work in the Division of Child and Family Development, and my portfolio primarily focuses on issues related to childcare. Although COVID has brought about a lot of new challenges for children and families across the United States, it's also exposed a lot of existing inequities that were already built into our early care and education systems. So in these cases, rather than necessarily shifting priorities, as Francis mentioned, it's simply become more important for our office to address these priorities as quickly as possible. The findings from OPRE's work are often disseminated through the writing of briefs and reports, and much of my work involves overseeing the development of those products. But the types of documents that we produce often undergo a lot of layers of review before they can be made publicly available. And because of this, the turnaround time is often quite lengthy. So on one particular project, my work pivoted from overseeing the development of these briefs to helping to organize rapid response working groups and webinars with key stakeholders to understand and address their most pressing issues. And with our contractor, Child Trends, we are also working to develop a COVID-19 research agenda and have also released key guidance documents that states can use to help support their childcare providers. Although we're still in the beginning phases of the presidential transition, I've already seen how some of the new priorities are coming to light. So President Biden's recent executive order on advancing racial equity and support for underserved communities discusses the importance of a whole of government approach to advancing equity for all. At OPRE, we're really working to integrate this approach into both our existing work as well as our new projects. And I'm really excited that this commitment means that I'll likely have the opportunity to engage with new stakeholders in unique ways to really ensure that communities' voices are heard and have a place in the federal research and evaluation process.
Thank you for sharing, Ellen. So the next question, we're going to talk a little bit about the differences with the fellowship from previous experiences. So the workplace culture can be quite different from academic institutions. Diana, can you speak to how this difference has been for you and what you have learned from navigating this new environment?
Sure, thanks, Rose. There's quite a few differences in the workplace culture compared to academia. I'll just go over a couple of just general cultural workplace differences. So during the fellowship, my time is a lot more structured with a 9-to-5 schedule where I work for those hours, and then I get off work without guilt or thinking about other things that I need to do. And this is different from academia, where I could choose whatever hours I wanted to work, but there was quite a range of hours that I did work, and because of data collection, I had to be ready to work, especially during evenings and weekends, to collect data from parents and children and be flexible with their work schedule. And within this workplace, my work hours are very structured and limited to those 9 to 5 hours. Another big difference is being fully a part of a team rather than an independent researcher with occasional support and collaboration. One component of being in a team means lots of meetings. In the workplace, I've been adjusting to having multiple meetings every day as opposed to maybe one meeting every week or two in grad school. And in the workplace environment, I find myself figuring out how to work best within a system of people, which provides more opportunities for me to ask for support and contribute as a team member. This is very different from being in academia, where I felt more pressure to figure everything out on my own. And I only occasionally asked for support because I felt so much responsibility over the projects that I was leading. But as a team member in a workplace environment, that responsibility gets distributed across everyone involved. So overall, I'd say the biggest differences in workplace culture versus academia for me has been the regular work schedule and being fully part of a team.
Great, thank you so much for sharing those new experiences with us, Diana. So next, we're going to be talking about building on the fellowship experience and looking into the future. So Crystal, could you please tell us if the fellowship has in any way changed your thoughts about what you might do in your career?
Sure, thank you, Rose. So I would say yes, the fellowship has changed my thoughts about my career by making me aware of the many career opportunities that are available to early career scholars that I wasn't aware of previously. So there are so many fields outside of academia in which early career scholars can contribute the many skills and knowledge that they gained following their graduate programs. So for example, within the federal government, there are opportunities to work in research and evaluation offices. So like the office that I'm placed in, the Office of Planning, Research and Evaluation, where we're responsible for oversight of research and evaluation projects that are focused on government funded programs. So within my division in OPRE, we focus on research and evaluation projects related to Head Start and Early Head Start, the Child Care Development Fund, or CCDF, as well as other important early childhood programs. So there are also opportunities to work within program offices where they're responsible for operating and overseeing those government funded programs. So the ones that I work with most closely are the Office of Head Start, who oversee the Head Start, Early Head Start programs, and the Office of Child Care, who oversee the CCDF program. So these offices across the federal government really value the perspectives that researchers can bring as it relates to how research can inform those policies and programs that are funded by the federal government. So I've also been exposed to other career opportunities outside of the federal government that focus on child and family policy. So these include research firms. So these are firms that apply for and conduct the research that the federal government, foundations, and state governments are interested in funding. So these are research firms like Child Trends, Mathematica, Urban Institute. There are also think tanks that focus on issues related to child and family policy, like the Center for Law and Social Policy and the Center for American Progress. There are also opportunities within advocacy organizations that advocate for children and families, like the Children's Defense Fund and the First 5 Years Fund. And finally, foundations that fund work in early childhood, among many other important topics, like the Annie E. Casey Foundation and the Buffett Early Childhood Fund. And I've probably only scratched the surface for the many opportunities that are available for early career scholars. And although I'm still trying to figure out exactly what the next step in my career will be, I'm thankful that I've been lucky enough to get exposure to these many opportunities that are available to early career scholars like myself through my fellowship experiences.
Thank you, Crystal, for that thoughtful answer. So Elena, how about you? Has the fellowship changed your career aspirations?
Yes, much like Crystal said, the fellowship has really changed my thoughts about what I might want to do in my career in two different ways. So first, it's helped me to understand different career paths, and it's also helped me to better understand my own interests and my own priorities in a future career. So the fellowship has really expanded my understanding of policy relevant careers for people with expertise in developmental science. And prior to the fellowship, I kind of had a general sense about different careers. I knew about academic or clinical careers. I was familiar with policy research firms and kind of the idea of government broadly, but I really didn't have a good sense for what that meant and what that entailed. And I had a really limited understanding of all of the different avenues through which developmental science influences policy. So within government, I now have a much fuller view of how science can influence policy levers, what those policy levers are, and the range of program, policy, and research offices across agencies that are doing work relevant to young children and families. So it's not just HHS doing relevant work. And outside of government, much like Crystal said, I have learned a ton about the landscape of the different stakeholders, including advocacy organizations, nonprofits, philanthropy, research-based organizations, and those that function at the federal level versus those that function at the state level. And I think COVID-19 in particular has helped me to gain a broader sense of the opportunity that exists for public-private partnerships, especially in responding to a crisis. And then finally, the fellowship really helped me in clarifying the types of work and the content areas that I'm most interested in pursuing as I move forward. I've really gotten to develop my own portfolio areas and to think creatively and innovatively about early childhood and early childhood systems. So it's helped me to be a little more strategic in what I'm looking for in my own next steps.
Great, thank you for sharing, Elena. And lastly, we have Jackie. And Jackie, could you tell us about the particular aspects of the fellowship program that have been helpful for you in planning your next steps?
Sure. So one big aspect of the fellowship program that has been really helpful for planning next steps is the focus on professional development. Although we spend most of our time working day to day on projects within our placement office, as fellows, we also have a unique opportunity to carve out some of our time each week to plan for the future. We're given that time and really